we're going to look at a thing I looked up the other day. I was looking up the term Captain African American, which was coined by a certain lovable yet senile older fellow with glasses and a goatee. Um, for the record, I was looking it up. I think I was looking at with regards to the notion of Captain America, Captain African America, Captain African American. For the record, like I love Sam Wilson as Captain America. The notion of making him, I love Sam Wilson as Falcon. I think the notion of making him Captain America was a completely ridiculous idea. I think everyone liked Sam Wilson as the Falcon, right? He was awesome. He was enough for us. But like the notion of, hey, we have to turn him into Captain America and give him a shield, which is it in no way makes sense with any of his abilities, namely his wings. Like the whole notion of is stupid as all get out. It's like it feels like it was the ultimate kind of white trying to appease black people's, whatever, in a way that they think black people will want. I'm not for sure. Like, it feels like if anything, they should have somehow done. Maybe you could have done a retrospective type thing on Isaiah Bradley. If you weren't too preachy about it, I think that could have been really cool. But no, we have to give the shield to a black guy because black people will like that. The dude was already like a war veteran and a patriot. Like he was already awesome. He was an awesome character, and they just screwed it up like nobody's business. All right. No, but I was looking up that and I found Robert Smalls, who was a Civil War guy. So amongst some other, there are like if you look up on a Safari or something, you'll come up with other examples of people who were African American captains. But Robert Smalls was an American Republican politician who was born into slavery in Beaufort, South Carolina during American Civil War. The enslaved Smalls commandeered a Confederate transport ship in Charleston Harbor and sailed it from the Confederate-controlled waters of the harbor of the U.S. blockade that surrounded it. He then piloted the ship to the Union-controlled enclave in Beaufort, Port Royal, Hilton Head area, where it became a Union warship. In the process, he freed himself, his crew, and their families. His example and persuasion helped convince President Abraham Lincoln to accept African American soldiers into the Union Army. I'll start at the beginning. All right. Robert Smalls was born in April 5th, 1839, in Beaufort, South Carolina, to Lydia Polite, a woman enslaved by Henry McKee. She gave birth to him in a cabin behind the McKee house at 511 Prince Street in Beaufort, South Carolina. He grew up in the city under the influence of the low country Gula culture of his mother. His mother lived as a servant in the house, but she had grown up working in the fields. Smalls was favored by McKee over the other enslaved people, so his mother worried that he might grow up not understanding the plight of the enslaved field workers, and she asked for him to be made to work in the fields and to witness whippings. It's kind of the ultimate tough love, huh? When he was 12, at the request of his mother, Smalls' master sent him to Charleston to hire out as a laborer for $16 a week, of which he was allowed to keep $1, the rest of the wage being paid to his master. Smalls first worked in a hotel and became a street lamplighter. In his teen years, his love of the sea led him to find work on Charleston's docks and wharves. Smalls worked as a longshoreman. Okay, now I have to look up longshoreman. The dock worker or waterfront manual laborer who loads and unloads ships. All right. A rigger and sailmaker. And he eventually worked his way up to becoming a wheelman, more or less a helmsman, though enslaved people were not permitted that title. As a result, he was very knowledgeable about Charleston Harbor. At age 17, Smalls married Hannah Jones, an enslaved hotel maid, in Charleston on December 24th, 1856. She was 5 years older than he was, and she already had two daughters. Their own first child, Elizabeth Lydia Smalls, was born in February 1858. 3 years later, they had a son, Robert Jr., who died at age 2. Smalls aimed to pay for their freedom by purchasing them outright, but the price was steep, $800, equivalent to $27,000 in 2024. He had managed to save up only $100. It might have taken him decades to reach 800. Escape from slavery. In April 1861, the Civil War began with the Battle of Fort Sumter in nearby Charleston. In the fall of 1861, Smalls was assigned to steer the CSS Planter, a lightly armed Confederate military transport under the command of Charleston District Commander Brigadier General Roswell S. Ripley. Planter's duties were to survey waterways, lay mines, and deliver dispatches, troops, and supplies. Smalls piloted the Planter through the Charleston Harbor and beyond on area rivers along the South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida coasts. From Charleston Harbor, Smalls and the Planter crew could see the lines of Federal blockade ships in the outer harbor, 17 miles away. Smalls appeared content and had the confidence of the Planter's crew and owners, but sometime in April 1862 he began to plan an escape. He discussed the matter with all of the other enslaved people in the crew except one, whom he did not trust. On May 12, 1862, the Planter traveled 10 miles southwest of Charleston to stop at Coles Island, a Confederate post on the Stono River that was being dismantled. There, the ship picked up 4 large guns to transport to a fort in Charleston Harbor. Back in Charleston, the crew loaded over 200 pounds of ammunition and 20 cords of firewood onto the Planter. On the evening of May 12th, the Planter was docked as usual at the wharf below General Ripley's headquarters. Its 3 white officers disembarked to spend the night ashore, leaving Smalls and the crew on board, as was their custom. Afterwards, the 3 Confederate soldiers were court-martialed and 2 convicted, but the verdicts were later overturned. Before the officers departed, Smalls asked Captain Raleigh, if the crew's families could visit, which was occasionally allowed, and he approved on the condition that they depart before curfew. When the families arrived, the men revealed the plan to them. This was the first the woman and children had heard of it, although Smalls had recently told his wife Hannah. She had known that Smalls longed to escape, but hadn't realized that he was formulating a plan and intended to execute it. She was taken aback, but quickly regained her composure and told him, "It's a risk, dear, but you and I and our little ones must be free. I will go where you die, I will die." The other women were less steadfast. They cried and screamed when they learned what they had stumbled into, and the men struggled to quiet them. Later, once the shock had worn off, those women admitted that they were glad for a chance at freedom. At some point, 3 crew members pretended to escort the family members back home, but they circled around and hid aboard another steamer docked at the North Atlantic Wharf at about 3 a.m. on May. Smalls and 7 of the 8 enslaved crewmen made their previously planned escape to the Union blockade ships. Smalls put on the captain's uniform and wore a straw hat similar to the captain's. He sailed the Planter past what was then called the Southern Wharf and stopped at another wharf to pick up his wife and children and the families of the other crewmen. Smalls guided the ship past the 5 Confederate harbor forts without incidents as he gave the correct steam whistle signal at checkpoints. The Planter had been commanded by Captain Charles C. J. I don't know if that's Raleigh or Raleigh. It looks French. And Smalls copied Raleigh's manners and straw hat on deck to fool Confederate onlookers from shore and the forts. The Planters sailed past Fort Sumter about 4:30 a.m. As the near-free slaves approached Fort Sumter, their apprehension grew. It was the most heavily armed of the Confederate forts and tended to be manned by the most suspicious soldiers. One of the men aboard said, "When we drew near the fort, every man but Robert Smalls fell to his knees, giving way, and the women began crying and praying again." As the planter approached the fort, several men urged Smalls to give it a wide berth. Smalls refused, saying that such behavior would almost certainly arouse suspicion. He steered the ship along its normal path slowly, as though he were merely enjoying the early morning air, and with no particular hurry. When Fort Sumter flashed the challenge signal, Small again gave the correct hand signs. Hand signs. There was a long pause. The fort didn't immediately respond, and Smalls now expected cannon fire to shred the planter at any moment. Finally, the fort signaled that all was well, and Smalls sailed his ship out of the harbor. The alarm was only raised after the ship was beyond gun range, for rather than turn east towards Morris Island, Smalls had sailed straight for the Union Navy fleet, replacing the rebel flags with the white bed sheets that had been brought by his wife. The planter had been seen by the USS Onward, which was about to fire until a crewman spotted the white flag in the dark. The sheet was difficult to see, but the sunrise arrived, which allowed viewing. Witness account. Just as number 3 port gun was being elevated, someone cried out, "I see something. It looks like a white flag." And true enough, there was something flying on the steamer that would have been white by application of soap and water. As she neared us, we looked in vain for the face of a white man. When they discovered that we would not fire him, there was a rush of contrabands out. What? Okay, what was it? As she neared us, we looked in vain for the face of a white man. When they discovered that we would not fire on them, there was a rush of contraband. What are we talking about here? Used the military during the Civil War to describe a new status for certain people who'd escaped slavery or those who were affiliated with Union forces. All right. Out of her deck, some dancing, some singing, whistling, jumping. Others stood looking towards Fort Sumter and muttering all sorts of maledictions against it. And De Heart de Sol. De Heart of de Sol. Souf? Wow. Generally, as the steamer came near, and under the stern of the Onward, one of the colored men stepped forward and, taking off his hat, shouted, "Good morning, sir. I brought you some of the old United States guns, sir." That man was Robert Smalls. The Onward's captain, John Frederick Nichols, boarded the planter, and Smalls asked for a Union flag to display. He surrendered the planter and his cargo to the United States Navy. Smalls' escape plan had succeeded. Nice. The planter and description of Smalls' actions were forwarded by Nichols to his commander, Captain E.G. Parrott, in addition to its own light guns. The planter carried the four loose artillery pieces from Coles Island and 200 pounds of ammunition. Most valuable, however, were the captain's code books containing the Confederate signals and a map of the mines and torpedoes that had been laid in the Charleston harbor. Smalls' own extensive knowledge of Charleston's region, waterways, and military configurations proved highly valuable. Parrott again forwarded the planter to Flag Officer Samuel Dupont at Port Royal, describing Smalls as very intelligent. Smalls gave a detailed information about Charleston's defenses to Dupont, commander of the blockading fleet. Federal officers were surprised to learn from Smalls that, contrary to their calculations, only a few thousand troops remained to protect the area, the rest having been sent to Tennessee and Virginia. They also learned that Coles Island fortification on Charleston's southern flank the Coles Island fortifications in Charleston's southern flank were being abandoned and were without protection. This intelligence allowed Union forces to capture Coles Island and its string of batteries without a fight on May 20th, a week after Small's escape. The Union would hold Stono Inlet as a base for the remaining 3 years of the war. DuPont was impressed, and he wrote the following to Navy Secretary Washington. Robert, the intelligent slave and pilot of the boat, who performed his bold feats so skillfully, informed me of the capture of the Sumter gun, presuming it would be a matter of interest. He is superior to any who have come into our lines, intelligent as many of them have been. All right. Smalls, having just turned 23, became known as North as a hero for his daring exploit. Newspapers and magazines reported his actions. The U.S. Congress passed a bill awarding Smalls and his crew the prize money for the Planter, valuable not only for its guns but also for its low draft in Charleston Bay. Alright, where was it? Southern newspapers demanded harsh discipline for the Confederate officers whose joint shore leave had allowed Smalls and his men to steal the boat. Smalls' share of the prize money came to about $1,000, equivalent to $47,000 in 2024. Immediately after the captain, Smalls was invited to travel to New York to help raise money for formerly enslaved people. But DuPont vetoed the proposal, and Smalls began to serve. Smalls was invited to. But DuPont vetoed the proposal, and Smalls began to serve in the Union Navy, especially with his detailed knowledge of mines that lay near Charleston. However, with the encouragement of Major General David Hunter, the Union commander at Port Royal, Smalls went to Washington, D.C. in August 1862 with Reverend Mansfield French, a Methodist minister who helped found Wilberforce University in Ohio and had been sent by the American Missionary Association to help formerly enslaved people at Port Royal. They wanted to persuade Lincoln and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton to permit African American men to fight for the Union. Although Lincoln had previously rescinded orders by General Hunter, Fremont, and Sherman to mobilize African American troops, Stanton soon signed the order permitting up to 5,000 African Americans to enlist in Union forces at Port Royal. Those who did were organized as the 1st and 2nd South Carolina Regiments, colored. Smalls worked as a civilian with the Navy until March 1863, when he was transferred to the Army. By his own account, Smalls was presented at 17 major battles and engagements in the Civil War. After capture, the Planter required some repairs, reformed locally, and went into Union service near Fort Pulaski. The boat was valued for its shallow draft compared to the other boats of the fleet. Smalls was made pilot of the Crusader under Captain Alexander Rhind. In June of that year, Smalls was piloting the Crusader on Edisto, for the love sound, when the Planter returned into service. An infantry regiment engaged in the Battle of Simmons Bluff at the head of the Edisto River. He continued to pilot the Crusader and the Planter while enslaved. He had assisted in laying mines, then called torpedoes, along the coast and river. Now, as a pilot, he helped find and remove them, and serviced the blockade between Charleston and Beaufort. He was also present when the Planter was fired upon several fights at Adams Run and down the Daho River, and the battle at Rockwell and at John's Island, and at the second battle of more of the same. Alright, that was fun.